So we'll get started with the recitation of the Holy Quran. And then can I just request Rizwan to please recite a few verses from the Holy Quran?
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me? Cool. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله نور السماوات والأرض. مثل نوره كمشكاة فيها مصباح. المصباح في زجاجة. الزجاجة كأنها كوكب دري يوقد من شجرة مباركة. زيتونة لا شرقية ولا غربية يكاد زيتها يضيء ولو لم تمسسه نار. نور على نور. يهدي الله لنوره من يشاء. ويضرب الله الأمثال للناس. والله بكل شيء عليم. Translation, Surah An-Nur, verse 36. I seek refuge in Allah from Satan the accursed, in the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful. Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. The similitude of his light is as a lustrous niche, wherein is a lamp. The lamp is in a glass. The glass is as it were a glittering star. It is lit from a blessed tree, an olive, neither of the east nor of the west, whose oil would well nigh glow forth, even though fire touched it not. Light upon light. Allah guides to his light whomsoever he will, and Allah sets forth parables to men, and Allah knows all things full well. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah, Rizwan. Could I request Luqman Saab to please lead everyone in silent prayers?
I think maybe with this Saab, can you lead us in silent prayers? This Rashid Saab?
Just join me in silent prayer. Ameen.
Ameen. Guys, as you can see on your screen, so the agenda is like just 3 key points. So we've already had the recitation of the Holy Quran. I'll briefly introduce the Holy Quran seminar series, and then I'll hand over to our speakers to share their findings on the nature of An-Nur. So for those of you who are new to AMRA, so it's Ahmadiyya Muslim Research Association, and in the constitution we've got 6 key objectives, but in the interest of time I will just share that the focus for the next 5-year plan are these 4 things, and our Holy Quran seminar series essentially fall under the one that is in the red box, so Seeking Frontiers with the Holy Quran. And within that, what we're trying to achieve is that we've all, heard Muslims saying that, oh, you know, that recent Nobel Prize is given for the expansion of the universe, but Quran talked about it 1400 years ago, and such like. We give all these examples retrospectively. But I think one of the things that we can potentially do is to take inspiration from the Holy Quran and try and conduct some perspective research. And today would, inshallah ta'ala, be a first formal step towards that, where Ahmadi researchers will go through some of the verses of the Quran of their interest and then come back and share their findings. And inshallah ta'ala, we will then, collaborate and take those ideas forward. So without further I say anything, I'll just quickly introduce the two speakers for today. So the first one's Zeeshan Sahab. Zeeshan Ahmad completed his MSc in theoretical physics and applied maths from the University of Birmingham, after which he embarked upon a Ph.D. in theoretical physics at Cardiff University. He's now a third-year Ph.D. student, currently working in the field of Plasmonics in 2D materials. So he'll be one of the two speakers, and with him will be Muddassar Rashid Sahab, who is a postdoctoral researcher at King's College, London. He did his BSc from UCL, a specialized MSc in Photon Science, and PhD in physics from the University of Southampton. His areas of research spans fundamental questions in quantum physics, nanothermodynamics, optomechanics, and nanomechanical sensors. So I'll pass it over to you guys to share your findings about ayat An-Nur.
Jazakallah, Muddassar. Let me just share my screen if you unshare.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. You can see this? Yep.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I'm really happy and glad that everyone is here, and it's exciting to embark on this really a new sort of adventure. But in some sense, everyone here in various capacities has been carrying out this adventure of exploring and extracting knowledge from the Quran. So we're going to talk about on the nature of An-Nur. So before I do that, let me introduce a few things. So of course, my name is Muddassar Rashid, and I'm joined here with my my friend and colleague Zeeshan Ahmad. But I also like to acknowledge two additional contributors towards this research that we're going to be presenting in various capacities. It's Fazal Malik Saab, who's also joining us here from Canada, and Navidul Fatah Dogar, who's been instrumental in helping and guiding my thoughts, at least in some of the ideas. But that is all of us are insignificant in terms of the contribution made towards this topic by the promised Messiah, Islam, the Holy Prophet, and the Khulafa, but specifically Khalifa Rabi Rahmatullah alayh. And you'll get to understand that a lot of the things we're going to talk about really is sort of revisiting some of the things they've said, and coaching it in some of the language that maybe the scientists are more accustomed to using, but ultimately, it's a lot of work from them. So that's something to keep in mind, of course. Okay, so at the very outset of any investigation, one has to really work hard to clearly outline the intentions. You can't just, there's exploratory research, but then if you really want something concrete out, discovery and research, of course, is not a linear process, but it needs guidance. It needs a focus of a question. And so the real motivation begins at asking the question, what is Allah's Nur? Specifically, when you come across the verses in Ayat An-Nur, Allahu Nur as-samawati wal arz, He is the Nur of the heavens and the earth. What does that actually mean? Is it a metaphor? Is it a poetic exclamation in love of God and His majesty? And in that spirit, you start to ask the question and start to think about, where is this coming? What is it saying? And when you take the first initial steps, all of a sudden you actually have to think a bit more and think about, well, hold on. I need to find out, how does creation come about? Because right at the beginning, of course, it's Nur is linked with Allah. And how is Allah creating things? Not only that, once you start to think about how does creation come about, you then have to ask the question, how does God endow existence? And how does he sustain that existence? And of course, this is all linked with the concept of kun fayakun and the attribute of al-qayyum, the sustainer of existence. And then the question occurs in your mind, is God and creation separate? Or are they separate entities? Or are they the same thing? Is that even possible? And if they are separate in their existence, in their wujud, then how does God interact with creation? What is the link? Where is the boundary? Is there a boundary? And at this juncture, you come almost full circle, because then you come to realize Allahu Nur as-samawati wal ards. This topic encompasses all these topics and these questions, and the journey is not complete for us, of course, but in this journey, these are the questions that have cropped up and are intricately linked to the question of what is Nur, what is Allah's Nur. And so in some sense, a lot of the stuff as I said, we're going to present is not necessarily novel. It's just revisiting it, but perhaps presenting it in a different light, and hopefully, inshallah, it allows us to delve into a different direction. But what is clear from the writings of the promised Messiah Islam and the Khulafa, that so close that the topic of Nur is also related to everything in the universe in one capacity or another. But also, it's interesting, if you look at ayat An-Nur, it's actually positioned in almost more or less in the middle of Surah An-Nur, the chapter Al-Nur. But the chapter is all talking about morality. It's talking about how to create a moral society, how to carry out moral actions. And one can naturally ask, I mean, this question really puzzled me, was how is ayat An-Nur, which is such a metaphysical, mystical verse, in the middle of all these really concrete ideas of how to do and think in society? How are the moralities related to Nur? And to truly understand that, you have to understand the character, the being, the wujud of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. So we're not, in some sense, that is a massive topic. In our presentation, we probably won't delve directly into the link to morality, but we will often go back to the character of the Holy Prophet ﷺ to try to understand some of the properties that are being mentioned in ayat An-Nur. And so today we're going to cover an analysis somewhat of ayat An-Nur, and Zeeshan will present some of that, and I'll try to attempt at presenting some of that. Many of it is basically what you would know, so hopefully it's just revision. There are some new things that come out from Zeeshan's research into this. Then we'll present something called the tripartite setup, the field, the lamp, and the cavity. And I'll give some examples from science, specifically scientific studies, which I think link towards this tripartite setup. And then we'll, of course, conclude this and look at future directions. And as I said, this is research in progress. And at this juncture, it comes down to us as a collective group to decide what we want to do. So we can discuss the tripartite setup if you think there's any validity to it. And I'll be very interested to explore this on both natural and social sciences level. I'm adamant that it exists there in all spheres of existence and all levels of it. Alternatively, we can look at what I've put it in the appendix, but it's there. A deeper look into some of the questions I mentioned earlier, the motivations of, the ontology ultimately of matter that we want to try to work out, of existence. All right, so without further ado, let me pass over to Zeeshan. Zeeshan, let me give you access to. Can you control my screen?
Yeah.
Oh.
So, Assalamualaikum. So I will present an analysis for Ayat An-Nur, and I will extract from the Friday sermon given by Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Rabi Rahimahullah Ta'ala on the 27th of October 1995. And in that sermon, so before I delve into the what is Nur, so in that sermon, his viewpoint was mainly that everything about a believer is related to the remembrance of God. It can be any action he does or anything he does, and anything he thinks about or ponders about is related to the remembrance of God, is with regards to remembering Al-Hamiyah. And so is the concept of Nur as well. And even though that link might not be immediate to us, but it is still there, albeit it's a bit it's a bit of a long jump, but it is still there. And this is what Hazur presents in this Friday sermon, along with other important ideas, but this is the main idea that I've sort of extracted from the sermon, right? So what is Nur, right? So conventionally, we know that Nur is anything that shines, is just light, like the sun or the moon or fireflies or the light bulb. So that's what we conventionally know as light or Nur. But what we want to understand Nur in a more general sense, and that includes, everything about Nur. So it can be the Nur of Allah, it can be the Nur which are derived from that, and other Nur, and the Nur that we physically see. So the Nur of Allah the Almighty is impossible to understand with regards to these physical and visible forms of light. So a deep understanding is needed. So the Nur of Allah the Almighty is stated not with likeness to physical Nur, but to the example of character of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. So this is very important. So in the Quran, if you look at where the Nur of Allah is mentioned, it is not likened to something that shines, or something that we can physically see, but it is with relation to the character of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. And that tells us that it is actually a covered or hidden Nur, and it's not visible, and that is the real Nur, and that Nur is the cause for everything. And in this presentation, we'll also get into sort of cause and effect. So as a scientist, one can question what is the cause of A, and that could be B, and then what's the cause of B, and then that's like a whole chain of causes. So our question is, where does everything start? And the answer is the real cause for everything is that real Nur, which we can't perceive physically. And all other Nur, which are physical, which we can see with our eyes, or which we can't see with our eyes but still exist physically, for example ultraviolet or radio waves or whatever, are just mere realities that are externally perceivable. And the question is, how are these related to the Nur of Allah the Almighty? Okay. And so this question is also related to the nature of matter. So why is it related to matter? Because Nur is actually a name for trepidation or undulation or anything that oscillates. And you can visualize that as a pendulum, or yes, basically something that oscillates, or it is wave-like. And if this undulation is produced within something, it becomes a manifestation of energy. And we find energy in various different types. And so that means that the undulation comes in different forms as well. And the energies that we see, hear, or feel, or we perceive, they are all related to these trepidations and these oscillations, and these are just expressions for these undulations, right? And so the physical matter, what it really is in reality, in precise reality, is not just matter. That's just what we perceive it to be. But actually, it is such a primary instigator of motion that imparts movement onto undulations or oscillations. And when this movement accumulates at a point, transforming into a congealed form, then we perceive it as matter. So if the idea here is that even matter here is can be broken down into wave-like forms or oscillations that possess energy. Okay, and Hazur has given various examples of how energy is transferred from a source and it increases in intensity in different processes. And a very good example of that is the human auditory system. So let's just go over it very briefly. So a thought or an idea is created within the speaker's mind. And at that point, it is important to note that there is very less energy. In fact, our knowledge of how thoughts are exactly produced within the mind is very limited, and hence that is very hidden from us. But then that thought sort of gets transformed into non-auditory waves, which exist in the nervous system of the speaker. And somehow, due to some intricate system, those non-auditory waves are transferred by the use of muscles in the vocal cords into auditory waves in the air. And then at the listeners and the eardrum of the listener transforms those auditory waves back to non-auditory waves in the listener's nervous system. And then that somehow the listener's brain listens to the audio that was in the air without actually listening to it directly. And so the waves exist just after the idea is created, but they are in non-vocal form, and they lack sound or they lack noise, but yet they are the cause for producing that noise, right? So one important point to take again is that where that idea or where that you can think of this as a foremost cause. It's very hidden from us, but it has the least amount of trepidation or oscillation or energy. And yet the oscillations or energy over here are maximized in intensity over here. So the undulation is created in a subtle form, and then it transforms into a more condensed form that can be heard. The first form of energy is voiceless and silent. The auditory energy that we perceive possesses noise and agitation. It is intense and can be even more so. And Hazur also says in the sermon that you can pretty much amplify the sound to the point that you can shatter mountains and you can shatter physical objects with it. And where the energy begins is the real cause for undulations, which is created within the mind. Until the noise in this undulation is converted into non-vocal form in the listener's mind, there cannot be any communication within the brain. And this is just one example of one of our human senses, which is the auditory sense. But of course, we have other senses like vision and feeling, touching and feeling. All of these have to exist have to be there for matter to exist. And we won't be able to say what matter is without the existence of these sensory waves. And then we have to think of ourselves as a creation. And by doing that, we realize that God Almighty has actually protected the central hub for these senses God Almighty has protected the central hub of these senses, which is our human brain, from the direct effects of these senses. And despite that fact, all of these senses end up in over there, and that's our main point of understanding. And so the heat, so any feeling which is like heat, cold, or sound, or vision doesn't directly reach the brain. It is the oscillatory information that reaches the brain. So, of course, the term of Nur encompasses all types of Nur, if we just say it like that. And that includes the invisible and the visible Nur as well. So, most of the Nur is invisible. And the Holy Quran does not include visibility of Nur in its definition, and that tells us that and there is some invisible Nur, but in fact most of it is actually invisible. And the real Nur is the nature of Allah the Almighty. The visible Nur is like a curtain for that Nur. The physical Nur has some resemblance to the real Nur, but the real Nur is not a physical Nur, otherwise anyone could perceive it. So in summary for this slide, I would say, so most of Nur is invisible, and the visible Nur, which we perceive as like conventional light that we see, is actually just a curtain for that Nur, and therefore it has some resemblance, but it's not the actual Nur. So Allahu Nuru Samawati wal Arz means that Allah the Almighty is the span of attributes that combine to be called Nur. And it's just like how white light is actually a combination of various different frequencies of light. So that includes your radio, ultraviolet, and all your visible spectrum and all the other frequencies as well. So just like how white light is not actually pure, it's a mixture of, maybe pure is not the right word. Is not the basic component. It can be broken down into further components. Similarly, Nur is an attribute that can be broken down into several component attributes. And of course, we know that there are some invisible colors of light which we can't perceive, but other beings can perceive. And light is not the physical light or conventional light that we see is not Allah's Nur, but is created from Allah's Nur, just like everything else is created from Allah's Nur. So the invisible universe is also Allah's Nur. And it should be actually said that the Holy Quran says that the first Nur is Allah and all other things are secondary or derived from that first Nur. Okay. And the fact that Nur is visible and invisible is very important, because actually it is the invisible which is more powerful than the visible. Allah the Almighty says in the Holy Quran, chapter 2, verse 4, who believe in the unseen and observe prayer and spend out of what we have provided for them. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So why is Nur referred to as unseen? Surely something visible holds more concreteness, and a believer would fear it more. You know, if you see something that is physical, you would think that you would be more likely to be scared of it or fear it more. But actually, Allah the Almighty says, a fearful person would remain surprised upon looking beyond the visible, as the invisible Nur is so powerful. And here an example is very relatable, which is the accident at the Chernobyl nuclear facility. So there was that accident, right? And all the radiation is out there, and it's still there. It's still showing its effects. It's completely invisible to the eye, but it is more powerful than the visible light. And the visible light, in fact, is not even that powerful. It just enables us to see. But actually the invisible part is much more destructive and powerful. And all ability to obey is bestowed through the invisible nur that a human being cannot see and cannot feel. And if we also look at how human psychology works, I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but this is just my personal observation that we as humans, we fear what we don't know much about, and that is what's hidden usually. So if you have an opponent, or if you're a nation and you have a opponent nation and you're going to go to war, if you don't have, the less information you have about the opponent, the more fearful you will be of the outcome. So the same idea sort of would apply over here as well. And the effect of the invisible on the hearts and minds and senses of people is so much that being impressed, they become worshippers without hesitation. They start maintaining the daily prayer. They start begin to give away what is theirs so that the invisible becomes theirs due to the love, vehement desire, and fear of the invisible. Okay, so now we come back to the idea of causes. So the foremost cause. Nur is not some assumption that we make. The real Nur that we're talking about here is not just some assumption that connects that disconnects us from moving into the beyond, but actually it is what contributes to the transfer until it becomes the foremost cause. At this point, human wisdom has no interference. Our wisdom concludes that this foremost cause is a creator but not created, because in the process of reaching the extent of our wisdom, those stages have already been crossed. This proves that the foremost cause is not that which we can understand with our wisdom at least. This is why that which is not everlasting is necessarily creation, and the creator necessarily not creation. Since if the creator were creation, that he would have not been ever since, and his existence would have become impossible. And so, why am I talking about beyond, and why am I talking about human wisdom? And so we want to know, where is that sort of divide between the wisdom and beyond? And so that's what Hazur calls a cliff in the sermon. So I'm just borrowing his words really. So understand the Nur of God with regards to the creation about which God says, Allah is the Nur of the heavens and the earth. Allah describes the men of understanding, which in Arabic is ulul albab. In the creations of the heavens and the earth, and in the alternation of the night and the day, there are indeed signs for men of understanding. And who are these men of understanding? The people who go beyond these scientific limits. Modern, you can say modern philosophers who are not religious philosophers, they say that we kept on finding the cause of something and something, but at some point they reach the limit of their wisdom, and then they stop there. They don't go beyond that cliff which is given, which men of understanding venture beyond. And so the wise is not merely a scientist, for scientists terminate their research upon reaching the edge of a cliff. They do not venture down the cliff, and so cannot reach the essence that is apparent beyond the curtain of Nur. Those who remember Allah while standing, sitting, and lying on their sides. So the idea of remembrance of God is actually necessary for you to sort of venture down the cliff, because without it, you cannot venture beyond that scientific cliff. And this is, as Hazur says, this is such an interesting journey that no drug addiction can be more intense. To get to the real Nur, we must venture down the cliff, and we also must keep the remembrance of Allah the Almighty in mind. So, in summary, the concept of Nur, just like everything else, is for a believer is related to the remembrance of Allah the Almighty. And Nur is a central attribute after the name Allah, and it is made of most of other attributes, and just like white light is made of other frequencies of light. Some Nur is visible, but most is hidden, and that is the real cause of everything, and it is the most real Nur. And I also showed you the example of human hearing, how an idea is created within the mind, but that's the hidden part, and then it transforms into something more perceivable, like the non-auditory waves in the nervous system, and it becomes even more apparent as it's transferred into the sound waves via the vocal cords. And the invisible is much more powerful than the visible, contrary to what someone might think at first sight. And so it comes back to the remembrance of God. So this is the viewpoint that Hazur uh, relates in his Friday sermon. So I will stop here, and I will give the presentation back to my colleague Muddassar Rashid Saib, who will go through the tripartite system as as given by the ayat An-Nur.
Okay, Jazakallah Zeeshan for that really illuminating journey and summary of that sermon. So let's continue. I want to remind ourselves once again of ayat An-Nur, because it's been about 20 odd minutes, and it's important. So we've looked at, Zeeshan has talked about at length about the light, the Nur, Allah Nur samawati wal ard, the light of the heavens and the earth. The subsequent verses is what we're going to quickly sort of go over and revise some of the meanings of that, and inshallah then we'll lead on to the tripartite setup. So Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. The similitude of his light is a lustrous niche wherein is a lamp. The lamp is in a glass. The glass is, as it were, a glittering star. It is lit from a blessed tree and olive, neither of the east nor of the west, whose oil would well nigh glow forth, even though fire touched it not. Indeed, light upon light. All right, so we'll these colored regions is what we're going to focus on for the next few slides, and just think a bit more about what is being said here. Now, Masih Maud Islam explained to us that, if you want to understand what the Quran is saying, the best thing to do is look at those concepts, those words, those expressions within the Quran. The Quran defines what it says in other parts of the Quran itself. And so one of the best starting point to understand, what is the Quran actually trying to say, is to try to understand how it relates to other parts of the Quran. And so it's important that we do a bit of analysis of the words and the roots of the Arabic and so on. So the triliteral literal root of mishkatin is sheen, kaf, and vav, and occurs 3 times in the Quran, in different forms depending on how it's used. But interestingly, none of it is connected to the niche. So the first two times it occurs, well, it's in this order, but the 2 times it occurs is in reference to some sort of complaint that is being carried out, and the only time it's found to be used as a niche is in ayat An-Nur, and this is also what we get essentially from the Lane translation of this word in this usage. And so, what is a niche? Now, oh, yeah, there we go. That's what I was hoping for to occur. It's come at the wrong time, so ignore this part. We're going to get to it in a second. Don't read it, okay? So this is a niche. Yeah, it's a niche, and in there you've placed a lamp, and it sort of brightens the area. And this is what it's referenced to. It's a niche in a wall, a hole or a hollow in a wall that's extending out, and it's normally placed so that the surrounding area is brightened by it. The light is brightened by it. An interesting question, of course, is why is that? Why does that happen? And when you analyze it, you realize, well, light is sort of bouncing within the walls within this confinement. And eventually, after a while, some of it also leaks out. And so it's intensified somewhat. But here's the leap. Here's sort of the jump that we need to make. Once we start to think about what the niche is actually referring to, it's a boundary problem. Yeah. What you're doing is you're spatially confining the lamp. And so you're introducing some sort of cavity or spatial confinement. And if we can make that jump, and it's a valid jump, I would hope and pray, then the physicists will be really getting excited, because all of physics is basically uses cavities everywhere. In so many models that we understand about nature are filled with with these boundary conditions, these spatial confinements for things to exist and to work within. So cavities are critical in physics, in our study of nature. And so the fact that here is a mention of this, it's very exciting. And then the question is, well, what does that mean? Well, okay, let's carry on and look at the lamp, misbah. So the roots of misbah are swad, be, and he, and it occurs 4 times in within the Quran. The 2 times that I've shown over here, they actually occur in the verses which are reference to stars as being adorning the lowest heavens. So these are lamps that are emitting light, and then of course it's used twice within ayat An-Nur itself as well. And so from this we can start to think about, well, what is the function of these lamps? Well, there's reference to these lamps often always with stars, and of course later in the ayat, stars are also mentioned. And so we can understand that the function of this lamp is to emit light, is to emit the nur, that Allah's nur that reaches into the lamp, and then the lamp emits it. And the purpose of it is not only to emit, but to illuminate the surrounding area, the space. But the lamp requires fuel, and it requires some protection, some concealment and amplification. How is that achieved? The Quran, the ayat answers that question for us. Zujaja. It means a glass or a globe of glass. But once again, I want you to think beyond thinking of just glass, and think of any reflective material, anything that is of enclosure of a type that might look like a glass. And interestingly, this is the only time Zujaja is used. And glass is just, in my understanding of it, in reference to the other parts of the verse, is that, you shouldn't take this as explicitly meaning glass, because explicitly the Quran uses glass, qawarira, in elsewhere. So, and the only time Zujaja is used in ayat An-Nur is here. So glass is just a metaphor in some sense. And it's actually referring to a property of glass rather than it being something of that kind of confinement. And so we can expand on that meaning. I mean, laden within this is this nature to almost say, rather than confine the meaning of this, it actually allows us to develop this further. And the takeaway message from this is that, and you have to look at the verses, the part of the verse that comes after the first mention of Zujaja, where that the function of it is to protect the lamp and to intensify the light, as so much as so that the glass is, as it were, a glittering star. So you perceive the glass. The glass is not there to be the real thing, the real emitter, but you perceive it through the glass. And that perception gives you the impression that there's light upon light. It's like a glittering star, incredibly bright. And so that means that this glass is functioning as something to intensify the light, amplify it, and in some sense protect it as well, shield it. Okay, And then the next thing that occurs is the olive tree is mentioned, zaytunatin. So zaytun is mentioned, the tree itself is mentioned 7 times in the Quran, but only in Ayat An-Nur is its oil referred, is referenced directly. And interestingly, that the verse further sort of states that the oil is there to light, it is used to light the lamp. And so it means that within the lamp is a form of oil, some sort of material that has the properties of this oil. Well, what is so special about this oil? And, you know, Khalifa Rabi extensively talks about this, but we can also do a bit of just general research that we found in recent sciences. And it turns out that, so I'm getting ahead of myself. So it turns out that, that this, you know, 99% of olive oil, pure olive oil, is actually fuel. And so when it's ignited, it doesn't produce smoke or soot in its pure form. And so it has this purity quality. Why that is, I'm not sure. I mean, I haven't looked at the chemical composition of it. I'm a physicist, so I'm very worried of going down that route. But if there are chemists here who have better knowledge of chemistry, it would be great to have that discussion. But it's interesting that this oil is used for biofuel, can be used for biofuel, for example, but the issue is that the production of olive oil is really expensive compared to using vegetable oil or something as biofuel. So it's not done so as of yet, but the reference to this is interesting. You know, the every time, everywhere else. So you might say, okay, well, let's have a look how the Quran sort of defines this olive tree. What is it used for? Every time you look at where it's mentioned in the Quran, you mentioned, you look at where the olive tree is mentioned in the Quran, it's about reference to the blessings of God on creation on earth. So all those wonderful things that Allah has given, the other fruits and resources, etc., olive tree is mentioned alongside that. And so it means that there is some true benefit that can be taken out of this, that's instilled in its very nature. And this is placed inside a lamp. Now, this has really deep connotations. And it's a sidetrack note, all right? But it's an important note, which is with the character of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, which is saying that Allah infused in him this oil, this type of pure, in his heart, this kind of pure material that was recipient of this light, that could amplify it to its most perfect order, and that everything, every part of creation has this form of material, from the animate to the inanimate. And all of a sudden, for the philosophers amongst you, will realize that actually this has really deep, interesting links to the ontology of things, how things are, why they are, and the way they are. The question of of the electron and its nature, it's intricately linked with this, and so it's very interesting. And then following that, in reference to the olive tree, it's saying that it's neither of the west nor of the east. To me, that speaks of symmetry. And perhaps you might say, well, you're just pushing concepts here, you're not really thinking about this. But actually, if you think about, in reference to the Holy Quran again, the Holy Prophet ﷺ again, it's clarified that he is the center and his light emanates in all directions, on all of the earth. And then again, it's the emission of this nur is symmetric. It's not directional necessarily. Okay, and so this is something I've already mentioned, and I had it wrongly put in the slide. All right, so now that we've gone through this Ayat An-Nur, I'm going to introduce the tripartite setup. So inshallah, this won't take too long. but I know Muddassar only gave us 20 minutes to talk about this. Sorry, Muddassar, it's just too much. All right, let's continue. What's happened? Oh yes, it's gone blank. All right, so now imagine the blank page is part of the presentation. Imagine this blank sheet that exists. So what is the Quran saying? Well, it's saying that the similitude of his light, the similarity, it's almost like his light is a lustrous niche, right? This is my cavity, this is my niche in space or whatever, okay? Whatever medium we talk about, not just space, it can be a wall, it can be the heart of a human being, the soul of an inanimate object, whatever you want to call it. In there is a niche. And the niche is very important because it's a containment. Wherein is a lamp, right? The lamp is an emitter, but it can't just emit by itself. The lamp is also in a glass, some sort of shielding, and the glass, as it were, a glittering star. So if you take the fact that within this lamp is a fuel, and the light, of course, is emitted from the lamp, and the light is bouncing back and forth in this, and gets intensified more and more and more and more. And ultimately, you will perceive it as a glittering star because it's just too much light for you to see as such. Now, I have to also make a side note here again. You know, I've interchangeably used the word light and nur. Scientifically speaking, they are very different concepts. They're related, but one is very, very large in its definition, while one is the light. Actually, the word light refers to visible light, and so it's very confined. But for our purposes, just forgive me for using it, but this is what I mean. I'm always referring to nur unless I specifically mention visible light. All right. So this is the tripartite system. So you've got the fuel, the lamp, and the cavity. Okay. So let me repeat that again. So this is the tripartite system that we're proposing, which is that you have some sort of fuel, you have the lamp, which emits which generates, once the nur gets in, it generates the actual light, and then you've got the cavity, which or some sort of boundary or some sort of niche or some sort of confinement that allows to intensify and contain the light and then eventually emit it outwards further. With this in mind, I don't know if anyone here, how many physicists there are, but I'm sure that there's does that sound similar to something? Have you come across a concept like this? I'm interested to see if you can make the jump.
Can you hear me, please?
Yes, Asif Saab, go ahead.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. This is a wonderful verse, and the meaning which Huzur has mentioned obviously are the meanings. Having said that, being a physicist, this diagram which you have drawn has given me a hint, and this is just my thoughts, that this verse also mentioned the atomic model. Obviously, once I went to Jamia Ahmadiyya, UK, and I gave one hour lecture. And apart from the spiritual meaning, which Huzur mentioned, I literally took a model of atom, and step by step, I compared it with these steps which you have mentioned here. Mm-hmm. So, for example, the lamp could be the nucleus. Mm-hmm. And you know, and I know you are physics, I am physics, that the atomic energy actually comes from the nucleus, not from the electron. So, and this is when he says, again, it's my interpretation, lamp is in a glass. That glass to me is the electron which is revolving around it. And by the combination of nucleus and electrons, atom is created. So this glass, which is protecting this light, you know, on the whole, nucleus and electron makes that atom. So this is one of my interpretation, and then this part which I mentioned, that symmetry, the word you use, which we physicists use all the time, is when the radiation, you know how the light is emitted, you know, as a physicist, how electron jumps from one level to another, orbit to another. That's how light is created. And it goes all over the place. So it is my interpretation, and I'm not saying it is 100% right, but in my opinion, there is a model of atom hidden in it. I don't know what are thoughts of other people on that.
No, Jazakallah for that. So it's an interesting observation, and I would partly agree with you. Partly, I'd say perhaps I need to think a bit more about the definitions and the roles of, say, the atom and the electron and the nucleus. But definitely, the nucleus seems to be, you know, a center stage of this lamp, and the niche being perhaps some sort of the field confinements that bind the nucleus together. That's an interesting idea. But yeah, this is definitely the right way to think, I think, and I agree with you as well in part.
And can I just say one more thing?
Gee.
You know, if you read this verse, the conclusion is Nurun ala Nur. All that what have God defined, explained. And again, I'm leaving the spiritual side. I understand that one Nur is Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the other Nur is, you know, Allah Ta'ala. So I'm not going, I'm talking as a physicist, talking to, you know, say to a person who is not even Muslim, who is probably atheist, you know, and because we say the Quran is the source of all the knowledge. Nurun ala Nur, and again, as you mentioned, actually, you know, God has mentioned that the Nur, and here I'm purely using the word light, which we normally use as a translation, that there is a visible light and there is invisible light, you know, starting from gamma rays, going to the radio waves to the other end. And there are 6 different types of lights which are invisible. So again, because I'm thinking purely, you know, as a physicist, as a atom model, and then God have explained a little bit more that Nurun ala Nur, that this light which you see comes actually from the movement, jumping of the electron from one orbit to another observation.
Okay. No, Jazakallah Asif Sab for that. So let me continue. So it is just really to start you to think about this in this tripartite setup. And so I'm going to present something slightly different. But you know, this is really, I need to go through this disclaimer first. Okay, so it's imperative to think about the fact that we're demonstrating a principle. You know, the principle is important, trying to understand the principle. And then and I'm not in any way saying, maybe it is true, maybe it's not, but I can't definitively say anything like this, that the Quran is necessarily predicting the laser. Yeah, I'm just saying that, because actually that would be limiting the definition of what the Ayat An-Nur is saying. It's simply saying a very fundamental principle that exists within nature, that we can utilize, that is being utilized. All right, so what is the fundamental units of a laser? A laser requires a pump. It requires some initial input of energy. And Asif Saab has actually already pointed towards what is known as spontaneous emission and stimulated emission. I won't talk about that, it's not necessary for now, but essentially there is always some sort of lasing material. Some sort of material, it can be atoms, it can be clouds of atoms, it can be some solid state device, you know, just solid block of something, but it's some sort of material, and within the material is special atoms arranged that when they're given certain amount of energy, they generate what is known as coherent light, and that light is emitted. And the final component of a laser that's critical to make this work is a resonator. It's called an optical resonator. It's actually a cavity mirror. So there's one cavity mirror here, there's a mirror here, and there's a mirror here, and this creates a boundary for the light, and the light just bounces back and forth. Yeah, it just goes, hits this mirror, goes back, hits this mirror, goes back. And in doing so, it also actually goes into the lasing material, excites the atoms again, and they emit even more light. And so eventually you've got this kind of cascade effect going on where light intensity in this cavity is just increasing exponentially until eventually it reaches a saturation point where the material cannot produce any more light. It's reached its end. As in, it can't increase the production of light. And the mirrors also have something called a saturation point, where if, say, they reach 95% of that saturation point, they start to emit light to make sure that they don't get burnt or whatever. And so the light is bouncing back and forth, and eventually some light is then emitted. And this light here that you see being emitted is actually is what you would have in your laser pointer, you know. There are additional components. There's components that amplify the light further. It's called an laser amplifier, etc., etc. But these are additional components you can add afterwards. But the cavity plays a critical role, and these are the components of it. And then it goes back to, well, it needs a fuel, it needs a lamp, and the cavity. And not only that, there's a description which is saying that, look, it's going to be light upon light. It'll be like a glittering star. And then the intensity is really insane in these scenarios. So this is a model. This is actually a practical model, but what is showing us that the model that's presented in what is telling me personally that the An-Nur model that is being presented in the Quran has applications not in just some philosophical discussion or in some metaphysical discussion. It has technological applications. It has a deeper understanding of scientific applications that we can maybe utilize. It also works on a sociological level, and on a spiritual level, and on, you know, psychological level as well. I'm certain of that. I don't have an example off the top of my head for that, but I'm certain of that as well. And so, certain is the wrong word. I'm sure that there is something to be sought in there. But that is the model that An-Nur is presenting. And I think it's a really exciting stepping stone to future research and prospective research. I want to present one final example. I'll be very quick about this, Muddassar. And this is the photon. Now, here's another disclaimer. I like disclaimers for consistency and completeness sake. So this is, of course, the nature of photon is one of the well understood things that we have in terms of theory and understanding within the standard model and within physics itself at large. And the use of, you know, light is everywhere. It's such an important tool in our investigation and understanding of nature. But still, there are very, very deep, fundamental, open questions about the photon, and there are debates and discussions about it. And so what I'm going to present, I don't actually have a concrete answer for, but I'm saying that maybe thinking about this principle will help us find new pathways. Just a reminder, what is light? Well, in a very simple definition of light, it's just an electromagnetic radiation. It's an oscillating electric field and a perpendicular oscillating magnetic field. And light travels in this direction, and that's what is contained within it. In the photon model of light, so this is a general wave model of light, a photonic model of light. I don't know why I put this up. I should have deleted this. It's too technical a meaning, but essentially the takeaway message that you should take from this, it is put up there for the physicists, I guess, to remind them. Actually, I know why I put this up. So this is in reference to set of modes, discrete excitations of a set of modes in the electromagnetic field in some cavity. All right, what is that saying? It's saying a photon is conventionally defined. All right, it's not saying that it is. It's saying that it's defined. It's a model that we can create as an electromagnetic radiation, this kind of radiation, confined in a cavity. That's the model. If you want to create a model of the photon, that's the starting point. What it's saying is that you have some sort of, the photon energy is confined to some spatial confinement. All right. But this is not, it depends who you talk to. It depends how deep you're going into this. All right. If you're working at just a preliminary level, you're actually told this is not true. You have to think of the photon as a point particle. And you have to think of it as indivisible and infinitely small. That's it. Okay. It doesn't have an extent. That's what you're told you need to think about the photon. you know, it's natural to ask what contains the physical dimensions of the photon, if it has physical dimensions. And I'm saying this is a very important question because motivated by the Quran's ayat An-Nur and the principle laden within it, I have to ask, is perhaps the photon does have an extent and it has a confinement. And if you, and I think there's probably, I don't know who's here, I think Rizwan is here, so he's probably best positioned to talk about this. But if you study quantum field theory, then which is probably one of the most advanced theories we have, then advanced theories of quantum mechanics, then a photon does have a confinement. Wait. Okay, yeah, I'm not 100% sure. So I think quantum field theory does posit that the fields are confined, and that that quantization that exists is something of this type, and that the actual energy is stored in the quantum field itself, that defines the electromagnetic field, and that the but there's a really interesting outstanding still question is, okay, so you've got a photon, light, that goes and it's absorbed by something. Where does it go? What happens to that energy? And the physical form of that energy disappears, it seems, but it can be re-emitted and it comes out again. And so what's happening to the photon when it's absorbed is still quite unclear, and perhaps not even possible to be answered, or I don't think there is a concrete theory for that. But these are open problems, and I wanted to highlight this as an interesting avenue to do further research in. Okay, we've been doing a lot of talking. I hope it hasn't bored everyone, or that it hasn't been too much of a revision. So we've talked about Nur of Allah as required by existence for all of creation, whether it's inanimate or animate. We presented Nur that takes on different forms, but is ultimately the source is Allah's Nur. So there's a spectrum of Nurs and attributes within Nur, and that Nur actually works. To truly understand Nur, we really have to understand the character of the Holy Prophet ﷺ and how that Nur is manifested in him, because that is the footprints, that's the blueprints upon which we can build our models. It's really interesting, right? We talk about physical models, but really to understand that, we need to understand the character of the Holy Prophet ﷺ if we want to understand what ayat An-Nur is saying. And of course, we've introduced the tripart system. Now, the future aims for this research is to continue translating the sermons of Khalifa Rabi'. There are lots and lots of them that discuss ayat An-Nur, and they are incredibly difficult to understand even for those who are well versed in Urdu. There's also some passages we found, almost footnotes that span hundreds of pages by Promised Messiah Islam, that talk about An-Nur and creation and all interrelated concepts. Related to this, although not directly talked about today, concepts of Wahdat al-Wujud and Wahdat al-Shahud. So this is also part of the research. And then this will, inshallah, leave us to a more newer, or maybe a more developed ontology that is based of reality based on Islamic theology, and allow us to solve some of the conundrums. All right, we'll just leave it there.
Great. Okay. Now, Jazakallah, Zeeshan Sab and Muddassar Sab. I almost feel that, we could have potentially have had two separate talks because there was so much to say, but I think there were such profound things that were raised and shared in this talk. And the three that I take away are, even when you look at the analogy shared at the start, so, something which is just the thought materializing in something which is bigger. And Khalifa Rabi said that it could even shatter the mountains. So that could be one thing that we can potentially take to, so our friends who are non-believers, and tell them that, smaller things can result and materialize in bigger things. I was also amazed by the research that's been put in terms of finding each and every individual word of ayat An-Nur and scanning through the Holy Quran, seeing where else has this word been used, because in some of the books of Khalifa Sani, for example, he exactly uses this approach to explain some of the very difficult topics, for example, on the angels, where he will, or how to develop a relationship with God. So he would go through the whole Quran Kareem, and he will pick up all the verses where Allah Ta'ala categorically says that, I love these kind of people. So I was very, this was very impressive, and, Jazakallah for putting in all the effort on that. And finally, connecting these theological ideas and inspirations that you have taken from the Holy Quran to what science has, discovered, and outlining some of the future aims. So Jazakallah to all of you. I do apologize that we ran over slightly, but maybe we can just have 1 or 2 questions, and we will wrap it up with that. And then, inshallah, going forward, we'll try and manage in a way that there is enough time for follow-up discussions. Asif sir, do you have a question?
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum again. I just want to share something with you. I have started some YouTube programs, and its heading is Holy Quran and Science. And my 7th program have already been approved by Jamaat, mainly Ibrahim Saab, who is our Secretary Tabligh, and apparently he has a committee who approves those programs, which goes on to Jamaat's YouTube channel. So I am looking, obviously I'm a scientist, but I look both from science angle and Holy Quran angle as well, which obviously you are doing as well. So I'm very, very pleased for this. So I just want to share with you, and if you could pass this message to your team. They are available on Jamaat's YouTube channel. I can send you a link if you wish. And my intention is to produce maybe, at least in my own mind, I have got the material in my own mind of at least 50 programs. That may extend to 100 programs. So my target is that on every week, I will be producing 1 program. Once they are approved by our Secretary Tabligh and his committee, they are then going to the Jamaat YouTube channel. And as I said, 7 have already been put there. So I don't know how can I share you the link, but if somebody sends me an email, I can give you my email if you want to make a note of it. My email is asif, ASIF _Parvez, PARVEZ 34 at yahoo.co.uk. So if you send me a message, then I will send you that link. And what I'm interested is, because I'm very impressed by this presentation, and obviously your knowledge is much probably fresher than my knowledge. I did my MSc 50 years ago, but I have been in physics all my life. So I would be very interested to get some feedback from you and some ideas from your team that, oh, this point we covered, at this point we covered. So I'm just sharing this knowledge.
Yeah, no, Jazakallah, Sab. I think people have made a note of it, and Muddassar Sab's also shared the email address of AMRA, so you can also kind of drop him a line as well.
And then, okay. I can send it to AMRA. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. Jazakallah for that. So can I just then probably just to wrap up the discussion? So if there are any questions someone wants to ask on the ideas that have been shared earlier, so please feel free to jump in and ask the question.
Assalamu alaikum. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, Musa, go on.
It's not directly related to all of those ideas because they're all a bit beyond me. I'm sorry about that. No, but the other aspect of this is that, what is the function of the light, right? Of the Nur, which I understand, is not a physical light, but it's some kind of signal, And so my view on this was that this is it's a form of guidance, So, like, for example, sunlight. When I'm driving and it's in day and there's sunlight, then I can see miles and miles ahead of me on an open day, and I can see all of the surrounding. But if it's very dark, at nighttime, then it's difficult for me to see 100 yards ahead of me, and I have to drive very carefully. So light by and of itself is kind of a guide for us, which makes things very easy for us to understand. So I was just thinking about this in relation to the ideas that you know, there's an invisible light which changes the behavior of men, such that they stand up and they read their prayers, or they give charity. So yeah, that was just my view on this.
I think of course, that's one aspect of the Nur, the property of Nur. So Zeeshan pointed out, you know, the Nur, because it has spectrum, some of it is visible, some of it is invisible, but ultimately its function is to bring into being something. So, you know, Khalifa Rabi clarifies in one of his sermons that that all of creation, you can think of creation. So you're talking about ideas, but let's go even more sort of deeper into talking about entities themselves, like electrons and protons and whatever. They until Allah's Nur doesn't shine on that entity, it isn't is. And so in the same way, you can think about, for you, from your perspective, until that Nur doesn't shine on it, you don't truly adopt and understand that idea. And it's Allah's Nur that allows you to then perceive, you know, ahead. And I guess in your example of driving ahead in the night, it's just that the physical Nur, the visible Nur, is visible light, is just a metaphor in this context. But for us to delve and get knowledge, deeper understanding, that's also in some sense using a form of Nur, but that Nur is confined in that domain. It comes from in that domain. It works in that way. I don't know if that makes sense. Maybe Zeeshan can explain better.
No, I think, yeah, you put it nicely there. Yeah.
Okay. Jazakallah. So guys, I think maybe we can give you some time back now for you to ponder over all the things and ideas that have been shared earlier. But the other thing I wanted to say was that inshallah ta'ala, going forward, we'll try and organize similar talks, and we've got some speakers lined up. But if you're also keen to get involved, so please do reach out to Muddassar Rashid or myself. He's already shared the email in the chat. And I'll probably just conclude with the words of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih al-Khamis Yadullah Ta'ala bin Nasr al-Aziz that he shared in the AMRA conference last year in December, which I would encourage everyone to go and have a listen to if you haven't already, and probably refresh if you were present in the conference. And Hazura said that the research of a secular person is based on a purely worldly approach, and they use their intellect for the sake of material progress. Their efforts can lead to scientific advancement, but the research of a believer has a far greater potential impact. Their research will not only lead to scientific progress and the development of modern technologies, but will also serve to offer proof of the existence of God Almighty. So may Allah Ta'ala enable us to use science to prove the existence and unity of God the Almighty. And with that, if there are no further comments, then maybe we can wrap up the session. And I'll once again thank you, the speakers and all the attendees, for being patient and joining us. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah.